I watched the color drain from my son-in-law's face, a shade of white I'd only ever seen on the belly of a dead fish. He sat there, his mouth hanging open just enough to look truly foolish, clutching a glass of the 30-year-old scotch I'd bought myself for my retirement. It was a beautiful moment. 20 years of hard work, 10 years of enduring his snide comments, and 3 months of his blatant betrayal all came crashing down on him in the span of a 5-minute conversation. He looked at me, then at the folder on the table, then back at me, waiting for the punchline. But I wasn't joking. I don't joke about my land, and I certainly don't joke about my legacy. To understand why a man like Mark thought he could get away with stabbing me in the back, you have to understand the kind of man he is and the kind of man I am. I spent 35 years working the floor at the local paper mill. I started as a grease monkey and ended as a shift supervisor. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. It paid for the 3-bedroom ranch where my wife, Martha, and I raised our daughter, Sarah. It put Sarah through a fancy university in the city, and it allowed me to buy the one thing I'd always wanted, 40 acres of bottomland along the Black River. Most folks in town called it the swamp. It was thick with cypress, water tupelo, and mud that would swallow a boot whole if you weren't careful. To a developer, it was a nightmare. To a farmer, it was a waste of taxes. But to me, it was paradise. I spent my weekends there building a small cedar cabin with my own 2 hands, watching the herons hunt and listening to the wind through the Spanish moss. It was quiet. It was mine. Then, Sarah met Mark. Mark was a consultant from the city. He wore suits that cost more than my first truck and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. From the first Thanksgiving dinner, he made it clear what he thought of my lifestyle. He'd look at my calloused hands and asked if he'd ever considered upskilling. He looked at my 1998 Chevy and talked about the carbon footprint of outdated machinery. But his favorite target was the land. "I just don't get it, Arthur," he'd say, swirling a glass of wine he'd brought himself because he didn't like my pedestrian beer. "You're sitting on 40 acres of prime riverfront property and you're letting it rot. It's a mosquito farm. It's literally worthless in its current state. You could drain it, clear it, and put in a high-end RV park. You'd be a millionaire." I'd just sip my coffee and nod. "It's not for sale, Mark, and it's not rotting. It's breathing." He'd scoff, a sound like a tire leaking air. "Breathing, right. It's a hole in the ground you throw money into. If it were mine, I'd have those trees down and a ledger in the black before the month was out." I should have listened to that hollow feeling in my gut back then. But you want to believe the best of your family. I wanted Sarah to be happy, and she seemed to think Mark was the moon and stars. So I kept my mouth shut and my heart guarded. I even made the mistake of putting the land into a family trust 5 years ago, naming Sarah as the successor trustee to ensure the family legacy. I thought I was being a good father. I didn't realize I was handing Mark a saw. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It started with Mark becoming more helpful with my finances as I got older. He offered to handle the boring paperwork for the trust. I'm 70 now, my eyes aren't what they used to be, and legal jargon has always given me a headache. I trusted my daughter, and by extension, I trusted the man she chose. That was my first mistake. Last August, I went out to the cabin for my usual Tuesday fishing trip. As I turned down the old logging road that leads to my gate, I heard it, the scream of chainsaws, the heavy, rhythmic thud of falling timber. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I rounded the bend and stopped the truck dead. A crew was there. 3 massive skidders, 2 feller bunchers, and 2 log trucks already loaded to the brim with 100-year-old cypress. My trees, the ones I'd sought under for 30 years. They were being butchered. I jumped out of the truck, screaming for them to stop. A foreman walked over, wiping grease on a rag. He looked at me with a confused frown. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Arthur Miller. I own this land. Get these machines off my property right now." The foreman pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Look, Mr. Miller, I'm just doing the job. We were contracted by a Mark Sterling. He's the administrator for the Miller Family Trust. He sold the timber rights for the whole 40 acres. Showed us the deed, the trust papers, everything. Paid in full." I felt the world tilt. Mark had used the access I gave him to the trust documents to forge a management necessity clause, claiming the timber needed to be harvested for the health of the land.
He'd sold my piece for a quick buck, and he'd done it behind my back while I was distracted with Martha's physical therapy after her hip surgery. I didn't yell. I didn't storm over to his house. I went home, sat in my darkened kitchen, and waited for my heart rate to slow down. If that had been the end of it, if it had just been about the money or the trees, I might have eventually found it in my heart to forgive him for Sarah's sake. But then I found out where the money went. Mark didn't use the timber money to help the family. He used it to pay off the gambling debts he'd racked up on some high-stakes crypto trading platform that had gone bust. He'd liquidated my sanctuary to cover his own stupidity. That's when I called Elias Thorne. Elias and I went to high school together. He's an environmental lawyer now, the kind of guy who makes big corporations sweat. I told him what happened. I told him about the trust, the timber sale, and Mark's arrogance. Elias was silent for a long time on the other end of the line. Then he asked a question that changed everything. "Arthur," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "does he know about the survey? Does he know what that land actually is?" "Which survey, Elias?" "The one the state conducted 3 years ago when they were looking at the river basin." "Arthur, your swamp isn't just a swamp. It's a Category 1 protected wetland and a primary nesting ground for the ghost orchid and the ivory-billed woodpecker, which they think might be back. More importantly, it's under a federal conservation easement you signed back in the 90s to get that tax break." I'd forgotten about that. I'd signed it decades ago because it meant I never have to worry about the land being developed. Elias continued, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. "If Mark sold that timber, he didn't just break your heart. He violated the Clean Water Act and about 6 different federal conservation mandates. The fines for clear-cutting a Category 1 wetland are, well, they're end-of-your-life expensive. And since he signed the contracts as the sole responsible party for the trust management without the required majority vote of the beneficiaries, he's personally liable." I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I let Mark think he'd gotten away with it. I even let him come over for Sunday dinners where he'd talk about his recent successes in the market and how he was thinking of taking Sarah to Hawaii. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did.
The reckoning happened last Friday. I invited Sarah and Mark over for a celebratory dinner. I told them I wanted to discuss the future of the estate. Mark arrived looking smug, wearing a new watch that I knew my trees had paid for. We sat in the dining room. I poured the scotch. Mark took a sip, leaning back with that punchable grin. "Arthur," he said, "it's good to see you finally relaxing. I know you were upset about the cleanup I did on the property, but you'll see, the land is more productive now. I've actually got a developer interested in—" "I got a letter today, Mark," I interrupted. My voice was calm, as steady as a heartbeat. He blinked. "A letter? From who?" I pushed a heavy manila folder across the table. "From the Environmental Protection Agency, and another from the Department of Justice. It seems someone reported an illegal timber harvest on a protected federal wetland." The smirk didn't disappear immediately. It flickered, like a dying light bulb. "What are you talking about? It's your land. You can do what you want with it." "No, Mark, I can't. And neither can the trust. I signed a conservation easement in 1994. It's a permanent deed restriction. Cutting those trees wasn't management. It was a federal felony." Mark laughed, though it sounded a bit thin. "Arthur, don't be dramatic. It's some trees in a swamp. I'll just pay a small fine and—" "It's not a small fine, Mark," I said, leaning forward. I opened the folder to the page Elias had highlighted. "The EPA has assessed the damage. 40 acres of Category 1 wetland, clear-cut without a permit. The fine is $37,000 per day per violation, plus the cost of mandatory restoration, which involves hand-planting 10,000 mature growth saplings. The total is currently sitting at $480,000. And since you forged the management necessity clause to bypass my consent, the trust isn't liable. You are." The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Sarah looked at the papers, her eyes widening. "Mark, what did you do?" I didn't know," Mark stammered. The color was gone now. He looked small. "Arthur, you have to help me. We're family. I did it for us. I did it to grow the family's wealth." "You did it to pay off your gambling debts, Mark," I said. I pulled out a second set of papers, the bank records Elias had helped me subpoena. "I know about the crypto losses. I know about the $85,000 you pocketed from the timber sale. You didn't just steal from me.
You stole from your wife's future. Sarah turned to him, her voice a whisper of pure betrayal. You used my dad's land to pay for your gambling? Sarah, honey, I was going to put it back. I just needed a win. I stood up. I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger had burned out long ago, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I've already spoken to the district attorney. They're willing to defer the criminal charges for fraud and forgery if the restoration is paid in full and the timber money is returned to the trust. But since you spent that money, you're going to have to find it elsewhere. I believe you have a very nice condo in the city with quite a bit of equity, and that car of yours, it'll cover the first few thousand saplings. You're taking my house? Mark gasped. Where are we supposed to live? Sarah is welcome here, I said, looking at my daughter. As for you, Mark, I don't particularly care. My environmental lawyer asked me if you knew the consequences of what you were doing. I told him it didn't matter. Arrogance usually comes with a high price tag. It's time you paid yours. I walked them to the door. Mark tried to grab my arm, to plead, to offer excuses about how he was under a lot of pressure. I simply stepped back and closed the door.
In the months that followed, the worthless swamp began its long journey back to what it was. The restoration is underway. It'll take 50 years for the cypress to truly return, but I'll be long gone by then. That's okay. I'm not planting them for me. Mark is gone. Sarah filed for divorce 3 weeks after that dinner. Turns out, when you strip away the suits and the expensive watches, there isn't much left of a man like Mark. He's living in a studio apartment now, working 2 jobs to pay off the federal government and the restitution he owes the trust. He doesn't mock my boots anymore. In fact, he doesn't say anything to me at all. Every Tuesday, I still drive out to the land. The logging scars are healing. The mud is still thick, and the mosquitoes are still biting. I sit on the porch of my cedar cabin, sip a beer, a pedestrian one, just the way I like it, and listen. The herons are back. The wind is moving through the remaining trees, and for the first time in a decade, it's finally quiet. My daughter comes out on Sundays now. She started learning the names of the birds. It's funny how a little bit of honesty and a whole lot of justice can clear the air. My land is breathing again, and so am I.